right, you're on.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for developing for changing requirements with custom metadata types. How many of you have a feature that you totally geek out over and is just sort of like your pet thing in Salesforce? Everybody has something like that, right? Yes, thank you. This is that feature for me. So I'm really excited to share about custom metadata types with you today. I'm Beth Breisness. I'm a senior consultant at Bigger Boat Consulting, and I'm joined by Daniel Hoekst, Director of CRM Systems from Instructure. And we are going to dig into custom metadata. So here's where we're going. What the heck are custom metadata types? How many of you have never seen this feature and you're just here saying, what is this? Thank you. Great. Awesome. Welcome. You're in the right place. Then we're going to talk about why you should be using them. We're going to look at how to use them in code. This is a dev track session after all. And then we're going to look at testing with custom metadata, because it gets a little bit tricky. So pop quiz. What kinds of objects do we have in Salesforce? I'll give you a hint. There are two. Custom and standard. That's one way of looking at it. We're going to take a bit of a different approach. If I can get this to work. Data and metadata. How about that? So we've got data objects that are for the business, and this is what your users actually see. But then we also have metadata types. That is what you as admins and devs see on the back end in setup. And those are also objects in a way. So within each of those, we now have standard and custom. So your standard data objects, your accounts, contacts, opportunities, all the stuff that comes out of the box. And then I work in the nonprofit space. I do a lot with housing organizations. So I have custom objects often for buildings, units, leases, things like that. You may have a warranty object or something like that. But then in our metadata objects, standard-wise, we have our validation rules. We have our account settings. We have translations, all of that stuff. But then just in the last couple of years, we now have custom metadata. There we are, we've arrived. Lease term settings, warranty settings, VAT rules. There's endless possibilities for what you can put in custom metadata, and we're going to take a look at some examples. But first, this is not working. Custom metadata types 2.0. We've come a long way in the time that custom metadata has been around. We actually have the inventor of custom metadata in the room, so at the Q&A, you can ask him questions too. His name's Avrom, he's right up here. Custom metadata can do a lot more than custom list custom settings, and custom objects. So they give you a ton more power. Hierarchy custom settings still have their place, but at this point, there's really no excuse for using list custom settings anymore. You can do so much more with custom metadata. Historically, developers have used custom objects to store some of this kind of configuration data for their apps. How many of you have built a custom object that's like a reference object for your app? Yeah. Don't do that anymore. You can do a lot more with custom metadata. Of those of you who raised your hands, how many times did you refresh a sandbox and lose all your configuration? A lot? Yeah, I've done that. So there's tons of reasons to be using custom metadata instead. When it comes to packaging, there's also a lot of power with custom metadata. I'm actually going to point you to a completely different session. If you are an ISV and you're using custom metadata in a package situation, you can go to how to package custom metadata, which is tomorrow over in the park. All right, so we've also recently, just as of spring this year, gotten custom metadata relationships. So relationships between a custom metadata type and other metadata types. So we can have other custom metadata types. We can have entity definitions, which is like objects. We can have field definitions. And then on our roadmap, yes, so we're going to have self-lookups for another record of the same custom metadata type. And this will all become clear in just a second. So here's an example. We have some SLA settings. We have accounts, leads, and invoices. And for each of those types of a case, for instance, we would have a certain number of hours that has to be responded in. And so this is where the changing requirements thing comes in, right? What if your SLA settings change? You don't want to change your code. You don't want to have to go dig in your code and find that hard-coded 48, for instance, and change it to the new value. You can just change it in custom metadata, and your code will find that. So that's what we're going to demo that. And in this case, this is not an account looking up to a particular account, right? This is that record for the account SLA hours is looking up to the object accounts. Likewise for leads and invoices. It's an entity relationship looking directly up to the object itself. And then we can take that one level further and look up to a field on that object. So we have to have an object first. We have our entity relationship. But then we can also have a field relationship. Now again, that's not the value of that account source field, for instance. It's the account source field itself that you are looking up to, so that your code knows what field to look at. And this used to be achieved with just matching strings before we had these entity relationships, and we could actually look up to a field definition itself. We would just have a text field that would say account source, and the code would look for the field that had that string as its name. That's obviously super duper error prone when you're populating your custom metadata records, but now when we have these entity relationships, it makes it a lot more bulletproof. So we can also look up to another custom metadata type. So in this case, we have like a two-tiered situation where we're storing the sales tax for a city, but then we also want to know the sales tax for the state. But if you have two cities in the same state, you don't want to store that value twice. We can actually have a separate custom metadata type for the state tax and look up to that record. So the CA there is looking up to a record of a different custom metadata type of the state type. And as I mentioned, we will have self-referential lookups within a custom metadata type. In Spring 18, forward-looking state, okay, maybe a little further, sorry. I also have the product manager sitting up here in the front row. Okay, it's coming. So let's take a look at how to create a custom metadata type. Does this look familiar to everyone? Lightning setup? I'm just going to come up here, or maybe not. Lightning setup is awesome, and you should all be using it. We're going to come up here to the quick find, and pro tip, all you have to type is meta. It's the only meta in the setup tree. So we're going to go to custom metadata types. Make sure I do all my steps. And we're going to click on New Custom Metadata Type. And we are going to call this Sales Tax State. So I'm going to recreate the example we looked at a minute ago.
Can everybody see that? Should we make it?
Oh, should I make that a little bigger?
Yeah.
Is that better? Even that. So, does this look familiar? Kind of looks like a custom object, doesn't it? Except it's not a data object, it's a metadata object. So, our next step is going to be, just like we would with a custom object, we're going to come down here and create a custom field. And in this case, this is going to be a number field. And it is going to be called rate. And I'm going to make it a 15 and 3. And we're going to add it to the page layout. And there we go. We've added a custom field to our custom metadata type. And now we are going to go back to custom metadata types and create our sales tax for the city, that object. So we'll go here. And again, looks just like a custom object that I've created, but it's a metadata object. So I'm going to create a custom field. And this time, I'm going to create a metadata relationship. And it's going to be related to sales tax state, right? Because if I'm on the city record, I need to also know the state sales tax. So I can look right up to that. You can see I also have entity definition as an option here if I wanted to link to an object definition. So I'll select sales tax state, and that's fine for my name. And it's similar options to when you're making any sort of custom field, required, unique, all of that.
There are some special things down at the bottom for packaging. Go to the packaging session on like how those will work.
Yeah, tomorrow. All right, and we'll add it to the page layout, and then we get to create a related list on our other object, just like creating any relationship field. And then we need our rate field on this one. Create another number field. Add it to the page layout. And there we go. So now we're going to come back out to custom metadata types. And we see we have these manage records links. So that looks familiar from custom settings, right? So we're going to go in, and first we'll create a state record. And we'll create one for Washington at 6.5. I believe that's correct. All right, so we've got our Washington sales tax stored in a custom metadata record. Now we go back out to custom metadata types, and we will create a record for the city. And we'll call it Seattle. And we're going to look up to Washington, and it's right there. Just like any lookup field. And Washington is Seattle rather, is 3.1. And now if we actually click through to that Washington record as the sales tax state, we can now see the related list of sales tax cities that are associated to it right underneath, just like any object, any relationship. So that is as easy as it is to make a custom metadata type, too, in fact, and populate them. And with that, I am going to hand it to Daniel to look at how to use custom metadata types in code now that we've created them.
Great. Thank you, Beth. So yeah, so like Beth said, they're pretty easy to set up, just like we maybe have set up our custom settings or custom objects in the past. But now we need to know how do we get them in our code. So great, we've got them in our admins are able to create these for us, but now we need to be able to actually use them in our code. So first thing we have to do is figure out how to get them out. The nice thing is that if you're familiar with SOQL, you know how to get them. You just use SOQL. There's one difference, and the difference is that we use __MDT instead of the __C when we're talking about the metadata type rather than using a custom object. And we're just, in this case, I'm just going to select a list of, so we're doing a list of that custom metadata type into variable, and just select the developer name, which always exists. So that is usually what you'll use as your key. So if you need to key things and find them, use that developer name, the rate, and we're just going to get all of them. So the biggest thing with this is that it doesn't count towards our limits. So everybody knows that, all right, quiz, what's the limit for number of SOQL statements executed? 100, yes, so 100. So we can do this 1,000 times if we want to in our code, it's not going to count against us. I wouldn't recommend doing it 1,000 times, probably cache it in a map instead, but you can do it if you want. And it won't count against your limits. And they're faster too, so they're cached. Your results are going to come back much more quickly than they would custom objects. So some great reasons to use them. But let's talk about how to retrieve multiple related custom metadata types all at the same time. So we can do this in two ways. So on line 1 up here, what we're going to do is we are going to use a nested query. So again, SOQL, familiar with nested queries, we're going to select the parent, and we're going to select all the children. So this will give us back an object. We'll have an object, and then inside that object will be a list of more objects. So we can have California or Washington and Seattle, all of the different cities within that state. So that's one way. We're just going to use that __R for the relationship, which Beth defined as she was building out the object. When she built that relationship, she defined what was the name of the relationship as part of that. It auto-defaulted to the plural, but you can change it if you wanted to. The other way to do it, depending on what your requirements are, you might want to flatten that structure out. So if we want to flatten it out, we can do the same thing that we do with other custom objects, where we query at the children level and do dot notation to get to the parent. So in this case, I'm going to query at the sales tax city level, which is the children, and then I'm just going to do sales tax state __R dot rate, and that's going to give me the rate for this. So then in basically one record, I'm going to have my city tax rate and my sales tax rate in one place, so I can grab that. So again, super easy. We're just using that MDT on it. All right. Now let's talk about that special thing, one of the special features that we only have with custom metadata types, which are relationship fields. So relationship fields, again, let us define it we can point to another entity. So we can point to an account, the account object. We can point to the name field on the account object. We're not pointing to a record, we're pointing to the object. And so let's see how might we use that for our requirements. So let's say we have a business that says, I want to map a field. I don't know what the field is yet. I've got this field on account, but sometimes I want to, let's point it to this field, and then later they're going to come back and say they want to point it to another field. Instead of you going in, hard coding in the field that they want to be mapped to, we can point that, we can have the admin go configure that in our custom metadata type and point to whatever field they want mapped to it. So we can use this. You could build your custom mappings. You could go from one object to another. You could map it and say from one field on an object to another field. Like you can do a bunch of different things, and but you're pointing to this field. So let's talk about how we can use that. So in this on line 2, I'm just going to create an instance of account. That's just get me set up, but the name is called demo. And then I'm going to query it. So on line 4, I'm going to query that guy, and I'm just going to grab the first one that's out there. And let's look at 2 different ways that we can do this. So the old way of not making it not dynamic and not able to change with our requirements is to just hard code in the name. So I can do a.get and then name. That's going to get me out the name of the account. It works, but the thing is it's not. We've hard coded it in our code. We can't go back and change it. But what we can do, though, is when we have that relationship field defined, we get a whole slew of other fields that we can grab from it. And what it is, let me look at this. So it's the field definition. So if you look in the tooling API documentation, there's an object called field definition. All the fields that are defined in field definition are available to grab. So in this case, I want to grab qualified API name. The nice thing about qualified API name is if I'm in my, it will include the prefix for custom, for managed packages, or so it'll grab the right thing for me. So, so in this case, I'm just saying the a.get and then the mapping MDT object, or actually the custom metadata type record, the mapped field, and then its qualified API name. So this way, I'm making it dynamic. I can go grab whatever field I need off of that. You may have to have some problems around casting. So in this case, I have to cast it to a string. And so you might need to put some you can also do validation rules on your custom metadata types. So you might say, oh, that field needs, you need to can only select a number field. And we can actually do that in our validation rules as well. So you could do some things where if you want to make sure like, oh, I only want to map this field, like if you're doing something with sales tax and you want to say, oh, when I multiply sales tax, I'm putting it into this field, you might say that field needs to be a currency field. So we could do that with validation rules, and then that way you'd be a little safer in doing your conversions and casting on your strings, on your values there. Okay, so let's look at an app that we have built, and let me take a look here. So let me do a little intro on this app while I'm pulling it up. And what the app is called Fuzzy Pick Lists. And what Fuzzy Pick Lists let us do is let us take customer like demographic data that is really hard to classify in a pick list. So think about things like maybe language or ethnicity or gender. So, you know, I'm not wearing it now, but I've got, you know, we have the button that we got that says, you know, what's my pronouns? And so we have the different pronouns, but one of them is ask me. So we're saying that we don't know what all the possibilities are. We don't know how you define yourself. We don't know how you define your language. We don't know maybe how you define your ethnicity or your gender. And so what we would like to do with this is give this to be able to just type in any value, and then let's map that to what we have. Well, we don't want to put people in boxes. We want to for reporting, right? So we're gonna put them in a box, but we want to let them put in whatever they like. So that's what I'm doing. So I've got in this case I'm going to look for language. So I'm just going to create a lead real quick. Oops, I can't type. And so now I'm going to go. You can see I have a pick list here with some languages, but I'm going to actually just put in a language that I speak. So I grew up in the South, so y'all might not realize it, but I do speak Southern. So I'm going to put Southern in as my language, and I'm going to go ahead and save that. So that's going to create my lead. And if we look at that, we can now see that it has identified that language that I've chosen as English. So this will allow us an admin to go through and map what people are saying their language is to a language in a pick list. So this way we can use it for reporting. So that's how the app works. Let's go take a look at how it's configured real quick. So here is my custom metadata types. Let me just go and do that a little bit bigger. So you see we've got a managed package here that installed 3 different custom metadata types, and the first one is going to be this fuzzy pick list. So I'll quickly look at it, but in here what we have is we have some field definitions. So we're pointing to a couple of different fields. We're pointing to some entity definition, to objects, and more field definitions. So there's a lot of field definitions in it. I'm not going to go into all the details. You can go grab the GitHub package and play around with it. But if we go manage that, we'll see that we have language. So in this language, we're pointing to the lead object, and our free text field is language text, and our pick list field is language pick list. The others are some date time fields we use for tracking when things were last updated. And then down here are the possible values that can get mapped in. So if we look at English, we can see our pick list value that we're going to drop into the API is English, and then we have all of these different possibilities for English that can be translated all into English. So regardless of what information we get from the customer, we can map it to English. So that's how we've defined that. So we can add languages. So if I needed to go add, French, and I might have Creole, or I might have some different ways that you might call French. So you can do the same thing. That leaves it up to the admin to develop and build this to add these things on, so that you don't have to go back and edit your code and be like, oh, this thing maps to this thing maps to that thing. So let's see, where are we? Okay. So let's look at the code. So we do have a GitHub repo that has all of this stuff in it. Blow it up. And we'll provide a link to that.
Make it bigger.
Yep. You guys can't read that? Okay. So this is our this is our GitHub repo. Let's look at first at how we are retrieving that. So we've taken the logic of retrieving those custom metadata types and put them into a separate class. There are a couple of reasons for that. One is separation of concern. So it's nice to, from a developer perspective, to separate your code out and do just different chunks in different places because it's easier to test. And this really will make it easier to test. But you can see that all this is doing is returning back a list of my pick lists with a bunch of fields. That's all it does. And we're looking for a specific object, so we're looking for like the lead object. And then what we'll do is we're going to use that in our fuzzy pick lists class. And basically, we're creating an instance of that class, which I'll explain in a minute. But once we get that back, so we'll get back the list. And then if we go look at line 27, we're looping through. So we're just doing this for statement. So we're saying for a list of all the fuzzy pick list fields on this object, let me loop through those and see what needs to be updated. So the benefit, what we've done there is we've taken that code and we've made it dynamic. So we don't have multiple. We don't say, okay, let's look at the lead object in the language field. Now let's look at the account object and ethnicity field, or we just put it all somewhere else and just put it into these loops and make it all dynamic. So I've used this into my own code where I had a lot of repetitive, like very similar repetitive code, and I took 300 lines of code and turned it into 10. Because what I was able to do is take all that business logic and put it into my custom metadata types and just let it go from there. So let me see. All right, so great. We've got this app we've built. We're really just using them just like we would the custom objects. So I think it translates really well. You're used to developing, using custom objects, looping through them. It's the same idea. We're just calling them MDTs instead. So let me go back to my slides. But we have there's some weird things that go on with custom meta types, and that's testing. So when you're using CL data equals false, which is the default now, can we see records? Can we see our custom object records? Anybody? We can't, right? So we can't see them. So when we're testing, we need to insert our test. So best practices is when we're writing test code is we're going to insert, say, an account and then run our code over that account so that we have predictable test results. We don't want to just run it over whatever accounts in the system at the time. There may not even be any accounts, or the accounts may have different values than what you're expecting. So we want to generate our own test data. The benefit and the problem with custom metadata types is that they are metadata. So they can be seen within our tests. But we have now given the power over to our admins to go and configure these things however they want. Well, how do we test that, right? So if I don't know what pick list values you have in your org, so I don't know which ones to run, which object to insert, which objects to run that over with. So how do I test that? And maybe if I have different permutations, so maybe I have some feature switches that I turn things on and off. How do I make sure that I've got all the features are still working properly? That becomes a challenge. And so then normally we would just insert test data and keep going. But it's metadata. We can't insert it. So we cannot insert it at time of testing. So fortunately, what we get with that is we can use mocking. So there's a nice feature that came out about a year ago. I don't remember exactly when it came out. But mocking allows us to inject our own classes that return data. And it's a whole session all by itself. So I'm not going to talk about everything about mocking. But I will show you how we used it in this case. So let me go back to here. So in this class, well, a couple of things. The first thing on this is I have this little guy here at the beginning at line 4, which is a test visible property called cmdtutil. And this has a getter and a setter. Basically what it's saying is, the first time we call a get, we're going to say, well, if it's null, then we're going to give it the instance of our normal one that we use. But the benefit of this is that I've exposed this for test visible. which means that I can do a set on it as well. So I can inject my own class into it that's going to provide back different results. So that's what I'm doing here. So I've set this thing up to be able to inject in whatever class I want that can mock my results. And so let's go look at our mock real quick. And here is my mock. So a bunch of overhead in terms of getting it ready. But the biggest thing is if we go to line 22 here, there's a giant JSON string. So, that JSON string is our mocked results. This is not an artisanal, handcrafted JSON string. I queried it using developer. So I set up how I wanted it in the developer org, and then queried it and debugged it out to get my JSON. So that's why it's one line too, because I didn't want to deal with formatting it because I kept making changes and replacing it. So normally I'd probably make it so it would look nicer, but in this case I just copy and pasted the thing as one line. But that's it. And we don't even have to worry about anything about these IDs. It doesn't matter because we're not inserting them, so you don't even care about if the IDs are getting returned back. You just take what comes back from the. So if you write the query as the query that. Go into the utility. So I just took this query, ran that query, outputted the results as JSON or as a JSON serialize, and boom, you've got it. So you don't have to worry about anything like that. So then it starts returning back. We now have predictable custom metadata. We know that it's always going to be this field is the one that we're going to look for. So then in my tests, let me go to the tests. Where'd it go? Here. So in our tests, we are creating, so this line 22 is where we create this stub. We're creating that mock, and then we are then setting it. So line 23 is where we then inject the one where we want to use, and then I just do my tests. I'm going to go, okay, I'm going to insert a contact with the name of Smith, and I'm going to run my match the fuzzy pick list, and then I'm going to check that contact and see if the lead source is web. So I know that I should always have web as my lead source. So if I don't, then my test is going to fail, and I know something's gone wrong. So great, we now have predictable testing. So let me just wrap it up. So again, so just to wrap everything up here, we are going to use the unique features of our custom metadata types. We're going to future-proof this code. So we can think about. It's really hard to predict the future, but think about what the businesses are going to ask maybe in the future. So, think about sales, rate numbers. If they're oh, it's going to be X%, that's a red flag, right? If there's any time where it's a hard-coded number, let's put that in a custom metadata type because they're going to change. There's just so many different possibilities that you can start thinking of as a developer of, oh, if I just do a little bit extra work and add these custom metadata types, when they come back to me, I can look like a hero because I can be yeah. Or you can be oh, that's going to be really hard. And then you can just go change it and then be done. So.
Go get coffee.
Yeah. Go get the coffee, come back and be well, it took me all night, but I got it done. So, and really, we can use them for just about everything. Hierarchical custom settings do have a use case. So if you do need to set values based on company org level, profile level, or user level, then use the hierarchy custom metadata hierarchy custom settings. They're still useful. So in those cases, you can say, oh, well, at my org level, I need the rate to be X, but this profile, the rate is Y, and this user, I have an override to Z. So you can do it on that type of level. And then, of course, the testing is probably the biggest challenge to get your code coverage. You've got to use that stub API, inject your mocking classes, and you'll get it in there. So, but I got one more thing. Is great. It's all for code, but I know we were just talking right before the session, and their product product team is working hard on expanding the uses of custom metadata types. So it sounds like there's going to be a pilot in spring that'll allow validation rules, and we're hoping to see things like full support in formulas and field default values and who knows what. So really excited about the future for that. And I'll pause on this one. So if you link to this GitHub, that has links to our package. There's a link to the trailhead. There's a link to some documentation on how to move forward with that. So I'll leave that up, but I think our next slide is the Q&A. So, we do have a microphone. This session is being recorded, so please, if you have questions, step to the microphone so we can record that question. Otherwise, they're just going to hear me go, yep, in silence. Nope. So, questions? Anyone? We got a couple. They're coming up. Oh.
Uh-oh.
Question stroke request is, I'm very lazy, so the thing I love about custom settings was the get all I created a map magically. Is there any chance that we'll get the same thing on a custom metadata? Where I can just say custom metadata.getAll and it'll generate a map with the name or the developer name and then just a list of it. Because I'm basically coding it 20 times. It'd be nice
Yeah, you're writing the same loop over and over again.
Right.
You're just writing a loop where you query it and go.
Right.
So.
If you use dynamic SOQL, you can write it once, was the answer from Avrom.
But I don't think we currently have it on the roadmap, but we do know that some people would like it.
All right.
I don't know if that where I would say file an idea.
Yeah.
File an idea.
Yeah, put an idea in for that. I think it's a good idea. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
So quick thought on your last statement about the roadmap with validation rules. Will that help with, say, right now, an admin can make a validation rule, but at the end of the day, I still have to go in the code and put it in my unit testing to make sure that it's accounted for, which makes me wonder if I should even be letting them do validation rules that way.
I don't think that you would be a substitute for like detecting what validation rules. Are you saying like because you're testing, like you might have issues where I can't insert an account unless I fill in X and Y field of this values?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think that would really solve it. It'd be more of where, let's say, you have maybe you have like a setting and be like, we have a threshold of X amount I don't even know quite how the validation rules will work. I'm imagining that you would say, let's go grab the metadata type record where this value is there. So like if you had different account types, you'd be like, for my corporate account, I want the value, like this validation rule has a value of 10, but for my for my education accounts, I have a value of 5. And so then that way you make your validation rules be much smaller. But I don't think they really help you in terms of like your testing. I'm just throwing, I don't know, is that kind of what you're picturing of how it would work? Something like that? Yeah. So I think it's more around just making your validation rules simpler. So rather than putting a bunch of case statements in your validation rules that say, if it's this type of account, then this is the thing I'm looking for. If it's this type of account, this is the thing I'm looking for. So you just say, go look in this custom metadata type, and then that's the value, just get it out of there.
Okay. It's also to avoid hard coding. So if you have, like, let's say, multiple objects, you have a validation rule that say, like, discount cannot be greater than 25%. You hard code the 25% inside the validation rule. Tomorrow you come and says, well, we've changed it. It's no longer 25, it's 20.
Yeah.
Now you need to go and define all the validation rules where you use it now and update it.
Yeah.
So you can go and update the contract.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, it's all about
if you have like a single value that's referenced in multiple validation rules, you'd also be able to just in all those validation rules reference the custom metadata type and update it in one place. And then that would update all your validation rules.
Cool, thank you.
Your code would have difficulty interpreting the validation rule in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
To know what to do with that information.
So I'll put a plug in for testing. I did a session last year on testing, and I have a GitHub repo called Salesforce Test Factory that you can use to generate your test data. And it doesn't look at your requirements, but it can easily define fields. So you can talk to me about that afterwards too.
So when you're moving metadata, custom metadata types between orgs, can you just move the metadata definitions
Yes.
themselves?
Yes,
So
yeah.
not the data within those
Yep.
definitions?
So yeah. So in your metadata, you're going to have the custom metadata type, which is like in the objects, and then you have the records. And so you can move the definition, the object definition, over independent from the records.
Okay.
And it's all packageable too. So you can include the definitions. You can include certain records.
So you can include the records as well?
Yep, you can include. That's the benefit is that, yeah, like you have to do a stage deploy, right? So if you're using custom settings, you have to typically do a stage deploy where you deploy out your custom settings, populate them, then deploy your code. So with this, you can deploy everything all at once.
Okay.
Done.
Cool.
Go to that packaging session tomorrow.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
more.
All right.
Because there's
Okay. I think we have
neat
time
security
for-
things on those
we can-
records
One
too.
more.
So real quickly, can this data be imported? So like using the data loader, import all of the managed records?
Not using data loader, no.
Okay,
You
so
have
there's
to
no-
use the metadata API to export and import the records. So it takes a
Okay.
little bit more skills.
Okay,
So-
thank you.
There's a loader tool.
yeah, there is a
There is a
tool.
loader tool. If you
Yeah.
search custom metadata type loader, it'll come up.
Yep. So we are out of time, but we'll more than happy. We'll
We'll hang out outside.
Yeah, we'll
You
hang
can
out
come find
outside
us.
the door
And
if
you
you
can
have
come
any
find
questions.
Vladimir and
Okay.
Vrome too. Thank you.